Hi everyone, and welcome to another module video. So in this video we're going to be talking about computer networking, and specifically what we're going to be looking at is two different ways we can manage network devices on our machine. So let's take a look at the first one. We'll just jump right in. As you have seen in a previous video, you went over the control panel, and in the control panel there was an option there for networking. So the first thing we're going to look at is the control panel option for networking. So to get there, we'll click Start, then we'll click Control Panel, and then we're going to find in this list here Networking and Sharing Center, or Network and Sharing Center. We'll just click that, and that will bring you to the first of three different things we're going to look at. So first off, here on the right hand side, we're going to get just a very basic overview of the network as it stands, or how this computer exists on the network. So this particular machine happens to be joined to a domain, ohs.local. When you go through and you read your book this week, you're going to learn about what the difference between a domain and a work group is. So just as a brief overview, a work group is just a collection of computers that happen to all be on the same network. As you discovered in your last lab, you had a bunch of, you discovered in your last discussion post, you had a bunch of machines, I think it was 30, that you had to plan a security policy for all 30 machines. And as some of you discovered, it was a little bit difficult, mainly because you had to actually go to all 30 machines in order to manage them. So as you might imagine, that can be kind of an administration nightmare, especially as you grow as an organization. Even just dealing with local security for 10 computers or 5 computers is a lot, and I can't even imagine having to manage 30 computers all individually. So Microsoft has realized this, and they've developed what's called a domain network. And so what a domain network is, it's a network that manages different aspects of Windows, all from one local management console. So a domain is managed via what's called a domain controller, and that's basically just a server that takes care of all of the ins and outs of the domain. So, for example, we had talked about local group policy objects last week, and local group policy objects apply to users and groups that are located on a single computer. In the Active Directory group policy, in the domain controller world, or in the domain network, you actually have the ability to manage the settings of users and groups across all computers and not just one. So in other words, you get to manage settings, just about anything you can think of in Windows, all from one management console, and it makes it really, really, really easy for you to manage users, groups, printers, computer objects, different things on your network. So let's get back to it. So this is where you would go if you wanted to find out some information about your computer. This is in the Network and Sharing Center. So this tells you that this is your laptop, and this is the computer's host name, and we're going to talk about what that is here in a few minutes. It's connected to a network. If it was connected to a work group, you would see right here just work group. And then that work group, or that network, is connected to the internet. So if I wasn't on a domain here, you'd be able to click See a Full Map, and that would basically just go out, and any computer or printer or other wireless device or device plugged into the network that had network discovery turned on, you'd be able to see on this network map. But since we're part of domain, I can't do that. So below here you can see the active networks that this computer is a part of. If you had more than one network interface card and you were hooked up to more than one network, you would see more active networks right here. So you can see here that we're just plugged in via a local area connection or LAN cable, and that has access straight to the internet. So again, this is just some basic information about your machine. Going down here, you've got a few options. If you wanted to set up a wireless network or connect to a wireless network, dial up, create an ad hoc network, which is just a network between two computers without the use of any networking equipment, or a VPN connection, which is a virtual private network. You can set that up through here. And I'm not going to go too far into that. I just want to give you an overview of where you would go to use these tools. Same thing down here. If you wanted to connect or reconnect a wireless device, you could just click this. This is going through something that's already set up, or this is trying to connect to a network that's already set up on your machine versus setting up a brand new one. So clicking this will launch a wizard, as you'll see here. Clicking connect to a network will actually just accomplish the same goal as clicking this little network icon down here in the bottom right hand corner. If it's if you're connected over wireless, this will change to more of a wireless looking icon. If it's connected over a hard connection, you'll see that it's connected with it will show, the icon will show up as a monitor with a little trident next to it. And if you click that, you'll be able to see what networks you're currently connected to. So if you have wireless networks in the area, you can see that there. If it's just a hard connection here, you can see it here. And this is where you go to manage your VPN connections as well. So down here, you've also got the option to choose home group and sharing options. You'll read a little bit about home group this week as well. In a nutshell, home group allows you to share files and printers that are located on the same network, or excuse me, share your files and printers with other machines that are located on the same network, all without the use of a print server or a file server. So it basically just makes it a little bit more accessible for the home end user who might not have the time or know-how to set up more of a centralized location for those types of things. And then down here, you've also got troubleshoot problems. So if you were to click this, you can see here that it shows you, it gives you a few options for troubleshooting things. So there's a little wizard that will pop up, and it'll go through some pretty basic fixes that sometimes will resolve your problem. So if you're having a problem connecting to a website or to the internet, there's a little wizard that would open and walk you through troubleshooting. Sometimes this can be helpful, sometimes not. More often than not, it's not helpful. Alright, so that's the main menu here. You can see here we've also got a few other options as well. We have change adapter settings and change advanced sharing settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the change adapter settings option. So we're going to click that. And then here we can see that we've got all of the network adapters that are plugged into our machine. If we had, and this is each individual one, so if we had more of them, they would show up here. So you can see here that we've got a Bluetooth connection. This particular laptop has Bluetooth, and I have the ability to connect Bluetooth devices up to it. So sometimes you can create networks with Bluetooth devices to transfer files and the like, or even just communicate with Bluetooth. So you can manage it through here. The one we really care about right now, though, is the local area connection. So this is the actual physical network interface card that is housing the network cable that's plugged into my machine. So this is where we go to manage this. So I'm going to right click it, and you can see here we've got a few options available to us. So first off, if we want to disable the network interface card for any reason, we could just disable it here. All you'd have to do is click disable, and then it would turn off the network. And you can see down here at the bottom right hand corner, this icon has changed and it says not connected and no network connections are available. So because we want to continue along with this lecture here, let's go ahead and re-enable it. And you can see that it was fairly straightforward. You can also check the status of the network interface card. So we'll click that, and it will show us some. It'll bring up. Wow, excuse me. It'll bring up a menu here that shows us a little bit of information. So you can see here we've got. We'll just go down the list here. We've got IPv4 connectivity, and that will tell us if what the most, I guess, what the largest device we can connect up to. And I guess in this case, the device is the internet. So we can get all the way to the internet with over IPv4. Now you can also see here that we have IPv6 connectivity. So your book's going to talk briefly about what the difference between IP version 4 and IP version 6 are. In a nutshell, it's mainly because when they were initially setting up IPv4, they didn't plan for as many network devices out on the internet as there are today. In fact, we've already run out of IP addresses, so we have to constantly recycle the ones we've already issued. So IPv6 was created, and it basically allows for a lot more hosts on the internet than IPv4 does. So when we get into, or when you read about how to address IPv4 and IPv6 hosts in your book, it'll become a little bit more clear. But as far as this menu is concerned here, we don't have any connectivity to the internet over IP version 6. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second here. It's telling you the media state, which is enabled. So you can see here that we've since we've enabled that network interface card, it'll show up here as enabled. If we were to launch this menu while it was disabled, it would show up as disabled. You can also see the duration that this has been enabled. You can see here that it's been about 2 minutes since we first enabled this card. And then you can see the overall speed of the network interface card. So this one happens to be connected to a gigabit network. If it was connected to a 100 megabit network, it would show 100 Mbps. So you also have a details option here, and if we click that, that will tell us a lot of the networking information about our card. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what all of this means here when we go over the command prompt networking tools. So we'll get to that in here in just a second, but this is the GUI way to access that. You also have the option to disable the network interface card, and then you've got some properties here, and we're going to talk about what these are here in just a second. So we're going to go ahead and close this. We're going to right click this again. Bridge connections, I don't want you to worry about that one for now, but that's an option. You can rename this network interface card to something more human readable. I'm not going to do that right now though. And then we have properties. So we're going to click properties, and that's that same menu we just opened up a few minutes ago, or a few seconds ago. And here you can see some you can see some of the connection options we've got available to us. If we hit configure on one, if we were to go back and hit configure on this, we would get the same thing that we would get when we go through the device manager to take a look at the driver or the actual physical hardware. So if we wanted to update the driver, or look at the driver details, or disable the device altogether, we could do that through here. And we've got a few other options available to us, but since we already went over the device manager, I'm not going to go over it too much. So we'll go back to properties. Now down here you can see that we have a few options available to us. The two that you really care about though are Internet Protocol version 6 and Internet Protocol version 4. So first off, IPv6, we're not going to go over this too much, but this is where you would go to manage your IPv6 settings. Likewise, this is where you go to manage your IPv4 settings. So if you wanted to manually set an IP address for a machine, you could do that through this menu here. So we'd set an IP address, we'd set a subnet mask, we'd set a default gateway, and then we'd set our DNS servers, and we could click OK. You also have the option to check validate settings upon exit, and what that will do is it'll perform a check to make sure that everything that you typed in there was correct. If we want to obtain the IP address automatically, which is what I recommend you set most machines to unless you have a reason to change your IP address, just set it to obtain an IP address automatically. Same thing with DNS server. Now, you're going to read a little bit about what what DHCP and DNS are. In a nutshell, just so you have it in this video, DHCP is a server that sits out on a network, and it hands out IP addresses and other information, for example, like subnet mask and default gateway and DNS settings, to any client that connects up to it. And the reason they have that is because you don't want to have to go through and manually configure each one of these options. So it sets this up for you automatically. So DNS, on the other hand, and DNS stands for Domain Name System, and basically what it's responsible for, it's another server that would sit out on the network, and what it's responsible for is it's responsible for converting IP addresses to human readable names. So for example, when you type in google.com, rather than having to remember the IP address to google.com, all you have to remember is google.com, and that's how I get to Google. So it just makes it a lot easier, or it's a service that makes it a lot easier for the average person to use services out on a network or on the internet. So again, this is probably one of the more important menus you're going to encounter throughout your career, I'd say, or throughout managing Windows 7, especially when you're dealing with networks or going into like desktop administration or that sort of thing. This menu you'll see pop up on the server side too. So again, this is just where you would go to configure your IP address information. So we're going to hit cancel. Aside from that, there's not much else you really care about in this menu. These are really the two most important things you'll be looking at. So we're going to close out of this for now, but again, I just wanted to show you where that was at. So now that we've gone over this menu, we're going to go back and we're going to look at, we're going to look at change advanced sharing settings. So if we click this here, we have a few options available to us, and this is basically where we would go to change different types of settings. And Microsoft has done a really good job of categorizing each one of these network profiles. So let me back up. So when you first connect up to a network, you'll actually get a prompt that says, hey, what type of network is this? Is this a home or work network? Is this a public network like at a coffee shop? Or is this a domain network? And then from there, it allows you to configure specific settings based upon what you choose. So for example, at home, you might want to turn network discovery on so that your other machines can easily connect up to this machine, like say over a home group, or you might want to turn on file or printer sharing so that you can plug your machine in and print, or other machines can print off of your machine. You might want to turn on public folder sharing so that some people can pull files or what have you from your machine from other computers. But let's say that you don't necessarily want people connecting up to the coffee shop's network to be able to pull those files. So here you could say turn off public folder sharing, turn off file and printer sharing, and turn off network discovery. So when you connect up to a network that you click as public, other computers can't see your machine easily. So that's essentially what these network profiles are. And again, you've probably seen that when you connected up to your machine, when you've connected up like a laptop or even a desktop up to a different network. It prompts you and asks you what type of network it is. So Microsoft has some of these configured by default. I'd recommend going through and just learning what each one of these individual things does, and playing with it and seeing what you can come up with as far as creating a solid security plan for yourself. This doesn't so much matter when you're managing a large group of machines in a domain network, because as you'll find out, we can set all of these at the domain level versus at the local level, so we know that all of our machines are set up and secure one single way. So I'm going to back out of this. So this is essentially the GUI menu for managing your network. This is where you'd come, again, if you needed to change your network adapter settings, or if you needed to disable something, or if you just needed to see some basic information about your computer. Or excuse me, about your computer's network settings. This is where you'd come. So we're going to close out of that, and then we're going to go over to the command line. So as you'll remember from a previous lab, the easiest way to get there is to go into the search and just type CMD. And then we'll hit enter, or we can just single click on this, and then it'll be brought to the command line. So there are 3 tools that I'm going to go over. And the first thing I want to do is I want to quickly go over some of the different network terminology. So to do that, or to kind of help illustrate that, I created this little network diagram, and what we're going to do is we're going to just talk about kind of some of the different network terminology that we have as we go through this. So first off, let's type ipconfig. We'll just start there. And that's ipconfig. And then we'll just hit enter for now. And so what ipconfig does is it essentially does that same thing that we did in the previous part of the video, where we went and looked at the different networking tools that we've got available to us. So just to kind of give you a side-by-side, if we go back to the control panel, and then we go to Network and Sharing Center, and change adapter settings, and if we were to click status, the information that it shows us in the command prompt is the same information that we get when we go to see the status details. So you can see here that we've got the IP address, the IPv4 gateway, the IPv4 DNS server and DHCP server, and we'll see that here in the command prompt version here in just a second. And we also have a description of the network configuration, or excuse me, of the network interface card, and the MAC address, or the physical address of the machine. So let's talk about what each one of these are briefly. So the MAC address, every network interface card has a physical address called the MAC address. And basically that's just a unique number, or a unique hexadecimal number that is assigned to each one of those network interface cards. And basically that just allows a machine, when it goes out to a network, to identify itself as a unique machine. So moving right along, we have DHCP, and we already talked about what that is. So again, just as a refresher, DHCP basically just assigns all of the information that you see here automatically when your machine connects up to a network. And that stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. IPv4 address. So this is when if you ever hear anyone refer to your IP address or ask for your IP address, this is the number that you would give them. So this number is split up into 4 different octets. And if you go and watch the video that's posted along with this one, it'll go a lot more in depth into this. So I'm just going to kind of glaze over this really fast. But the IP address is basically like, think of it like your home address. You know, for example, PCC's address might be 5555 PCC lane. And your IP address is exactly the same as, like a physical address would be on a street. So this is how people know to find you, and by people I mean other computers on your network. This is how they know how to find you, is by your IP address. So that's essentially what that is. The subnet mask basically just defines the number of digits on this, or on your IP address, that identify the network ID versus the host ID. Now again, you're going to talk about, or you're going to see that here if you go watch the supplementary video to this module. You'll also read about subnet masks in your book. So again, I'm going to just glaze over that for now. You can also see the lease and when it was obtained and when it expires. When your machine connects up to a network, it's given all this information here on a lease. So after a certain amount of time, that information is recollected back into the DHCP server, and then when that happens, it assigns you a new one automatically. The default gateway, that is the device that handles all of the communication between networks. So in our example here, you'll see that the default gateway is the device at the border of our network, and it's what connects up to the internet. So this might be at your house, this might be like your router, and your router might be your default gateway before it connects up to your modem. DHCP server, this just tells you the IP address of the server that assigned all of this networking information to you. The DNS server, again, just to cover what DNS does again, is it assigns human readable names to IP addresses. And so this tells you what your IPv4 DNS servers are. You can have multiple DNS servers, so if one were to fail, the other one would pick up for it. And then you've got a few other information, or a few other pieces of info down here, and I'm just going to not cover that at this point in time. Because it has to deal with IPv6. 9 times out of 10, at least right now, you'll probably be dealing with IPv4. But I think as we move through time, you'll probably be dealing with IPv6 more and more. But IPv4 is the most common at this point in time. So we're gonna keep this open, and we're just gonna take a look at a network diagram I created as we go through these. Different commands, it'll make a little bit more sense. So this is just a little tiny network diagram of the network that my computer is on. So my computer's host name, which is, again, it's just its human readable name. So rather than having to remember 10.192.201.218, I just have to remember that my laptop is named Tim VM Laptop. So my laptop is connected up with a hard connection to a switch. And a switch is basically just a device. It's a networking device that acts as a little, I like to think of it as like a distribution facility for packages or for network traffic that gets sent between two computers or two hosts. So the switch is then connected up to a MacBook Pro, and we'll see we're going to look at this in a little bit more depth here in a second. That switch is also connected up to the server 1, which is again our DNS server. That is connected up to that same switch. And our DNS server 2 is also connected up to that same switch. And finally, our default gateway, that is also connected up to the switch. And then on the other side of that gateway is the internet. And we'll see how Google.com comes to play here in just a second. So there's a few commands that are really, really useful when troubleshooting network connectivity. So the first one is ipconfig. So we just looked at that, and ipconfig just tells you that information that we looked at here in the GUI. It tells you your IP address, your subnet mask, your default gateway. And it tells you information about all of the other devices that are connected up to a network. So if we want to look at the information here in a little bit more verbosity, or a little bit more in depth, let's say, we could type ipconfig, and then space, and then -all. And what that will do is it will tell us a lot more information. So pretty much what we had looked at in the GUI menu, ipconfig/all will be what you'll see, or the information that you saw in that GUI menu will be what you see when you type ipconfig/space/all. So again, ipconfig, just to recap, tells you a little bit about your networking information. So let's say we want to figure out if let's back up. So let's use this as an example. Let's say we have our MacBook Pro here, and we've connected it up to the wireless, but we're having trouble seeing or we're having trouble getting out to Google.com. So what we might do, or what we can do just to test to see if it's on the network, is we can run the ping command. So what the ping command does is it sends packets, which is basically just the unit of data that's routed between one host to another. So it's kind of like the network stream. I almost like to think of the whole network as a big like a FedEx delivery system. You've got all the components to deliver these packages or these little bits of information between one host or another. So kind of going back to our street analogy, these different devices are all put in place in order to deliver effectively what are just little envelopes or packages from one address to another. So going back to our example, let's say if we want to, let's say we connected up our MacBook Pro. It's not quite network accessible because we can't get to Google from it. So maybe we go over to another computer and we want to see if that computer can talk to it. So the ping command basically just tests to see if two computers can effectively just talk to each other. So in order to get the networking information on the MacBook Pro, we would type ipconfig if it was running Windows, and we would get its IP address. And in this case, we did that, and we know that the IP address is 10.192.201.155. So if we wanted to ping it, we could type ping space and then the IP address, 10.192.201.155. And then we'd hit enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to send out 4 packets. So we can see here that it sent out 1, 2, 3, 4. And then because the MacBook Pro is on the network, then it sent some packets back to us. So we got a reply from it. So essentially we made a little phone call almost to it. And we said, hey MacBook Pro, are you online? The MacBook Pro said, yeah. So you've got a little bit of information here. You can see here that we pinged this address, 10.192.201.155. You can change the amount of information that gets sent. So we sent 32 bytes, which is the default. You can see how long it took for it to reply to us, which was less than 1 millisecond. And then you can look at the time to live, which is 64 seconds. And the time to live basically just says how long the packet can live out on a network before a network device can just discard it. And then it gives you some information down here. So it says, hey, we sent 4 packets, we received 4 packets, 0 packets were lost. And this tells you kind of the round trip time. So it was less than 1 ms basically, or millisecond. So that command basically just tells us, hey, that device is out on the network. Now the ping command has a few different command line switches that we can look at. I'll just show you one of my favorites, or one of the more useful ones, and we'll do ping ? And that tells us what we can do. So ping-a will actually resolve addresses to host name. So let's say we knew the IP address of this MacBook Pro, but we didn't know the name of it. We can figure that out by just pinging it with the ping-a command. So ping-a, and then we'll type the IP address one more time, which was 10.192.201.155. And what this is going to do is it's going to query that DNS server, and it's going to say, hey, DNS server, what is the name of the human readable name associated with this IP address? So you can see here we got a reply just like we did last time, and we got the host name of that MacBook Pro, which happens to be MacBook Pro 3D15. So that's just another useful thing you can do. There's a few other command line switches, but that's by far one of my favorites and one of the easiest to remember and to use. The other one that is really, really useful is ping-t. So if you wanted to start a continuous ping, so let's say we wanted to ping that MacBook Pro until we told it to stop, we could type ping-t. And then what it's going to do is, instead of just sending 4, it's going to send as many as we tell it to until it stops. So you can see here that it's just going to keep going. And what that's really useful for is if you've got a machine that you've noticed that it's dropping network connection, but it's doing it intermittently, you can run a continuous ping on it, and that will tell you when the network connection just went down, or when the network connection went down. So just to illustrate my point, what I'm going to go through and do here really quick is I'm going to just disable that network connection that we have up. So we'll go back into Network and Sharing Center. We'll go to Change Adapter Settings, and we're going to just disable the network. So now you can see we're getting errors because that network connection has been disabled. And as soon as we re-enable it, we get pings back again. So that just illustrates my point. You can use this tool here, this ping tool, to test to see if something is available on a network. Again, ping-a is really useful for trying to figure out what the host name of an IP address is. Ping-t will start a continuous ping, and that can be useful for a multitude of reasons, as we just saw. To get out of this, you can either close the command prompt window, or you can press Control-C. So that's ipconfig and ping. Now the next thing that's really useful is traceroute. So as you might notice, there are, and this is just a very simple network, but between google.com and TimVM Laptop on just the local network here, we have at least 2 devices that the data has to flow through before it gets to Google. And that doesn't even include all the devices that are out there on the internet that have to route your information to google.com. So what happens if we have a gateway here and our gateway just decides to die? Well, sometimes it's not always very obvious that that's where it's having trouble, because again, we have a whole bunch of hops here. Imagine if our network was a little bit bigger and we had, before we got to the internet, there was maybe 4 gateways. it might be a little bit difficult to track down which one's the problem. So to help with that, there's this traceroute command, or traceRT. And so what traceroute does is, and you can see here that it just brought up that that menu. Traceroute is kind of similar to ping, but what it does is it keeps track of all of the hosts or all of the network devices that your network traffic is going through. And then it tells you if it made it through or not. So if you know that in order to get to Google, you have to go from this machine to the switch, through the gateway, and then maybe through another gateway, and then out to the internet, you know that it has to hit that many devices, and this will help you troubleshoot which device that particular host or that particular client here is having trouble with. So just to illustrate my point, I'm going to traceroute Google. So I'm going to say trace, T-R-A-C-E-R-T, and then I'm just going to type google.com. And so what this is going to do is it's going to tell us how long it took to get there, and all of the IP address information or host name information of the devices that it had to go through to get to google.com. So we'll just sit here and watch it go and do its thing. And this is kind of interesting too. So it went out of our gateway, which is 10.192.201.1, which we can see here. It went to a server in Oregon, a Comcast server. Then it hit another device and it couldn't quite get there, so it looks like it rerouted to a server in Beaverton. That sent it to a server in Troutdale, which then forwarded it to a server in Washington. Then it forwarded it to a server in Seattle. One was in Seattle, the next one was in Seattle, and then it went through these these IP addresses before it finally reached Google's servers at 173.194.33.110. So we can see here that there was a whole bunch of networking devices that went into us just getting to Google. So, just to illustrate my point here, just going to google.com actually takes us through all of these different devices before it even gets us to this page. So again, what the traceroute command does is it tells us, hey, which one of these devices might be failing. Now, some networks are set up in such a way that if a device fails, it automatically routes you over to another one. So sometimes it's not always obvious, but depending on how your network is set up, you should be able to figure it out, at least locally. So that is the traceroute command, and those are the three, I think, most useful commands in the Windows operating system as far as dealing with network connectivity goes. There are quite a few other commands that I highly encourage you to explore. I just wanted to go over the three useful ones that I pretty much use on a daily basis. Excuse me. Let's see here. Is there anything else I can show you? I think that's all I want to show you in this video. As always, if you have any questions, please post them to the discussion board. If you can't get a quick enough response, or if no one responds to you within 24 hours, you can always email me. That's tim.green@pcc.edu. You can find that right in the Desire to Learn email system. It's been great talking about networking information with you. This is just a really brief general overview of some of the tools that are available in Windows to help you troubleshoot networking connectivity issues. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic week.